South Africa is in an energy state of disaster. The president announced this move last night in the SONA address. Now the government has been given additional powers to respond to the energy crisis, cutting the red tape by permitting emergency procurement procedures with fewer bureaucratic delays and less oversight. We saw this legislation invoked to enable health authorities to respond more swiftly to the COVID-19 pandemic. So will this help the government expand power supply much quicker? Well, let's speak to energy expert Lungile Mashele to find out just this. Lungile, good morning and thank you very much for your time. So it's happened. They've declared a state of disaster at Eskom. Just your initial views.
So, it should be interesting because this is what industry has been calling for quite some time, and primarily so that they can act with a sense of urgency, the urgency that is required to end load shedding in the shortest amount of time. Yes, there are concerns that have been raised around corruption, as we saw during COVID and the PPE issues that we had. The president has assured some kind of protection through the Auditor General. This is yet to be seen what kind of role they could possibly play in ensuring that there's no corrupt activities during this whole process. But, I think in unpacking the state of disaster, one of the very clear and important things is that procurement needs to happen at a faster scale. The procurement that we're seeing happening now has public participation processes that can last up to 2 years, if not more. We've had incidents in other countries, such as Germany, when they entered their electricity crisis last year, or their energy crisis. They moved very swiftly. They were able to procure stuff such as floating storage and regasification units in under a year. That typically does take a couple of years, and they did this through emergency procurement, which even limits public participation to 2 weeks at the very most.
I'm sure you would have heard then some of the unions, particularly SAFTU, coming out to say, for them at the very least, they feel everything that they want to do now could have still been possible, particularly exempting some of the hospitals, the schools and police stations. So you're saying in this instance, they're very misguided?
Not at all. So, there are certain aspects such as the not load shedding of hospitals or of schools that they did not need a state of disaster for. And it's unsure, and I'm unsure why they had to go that route in order to achieve that. A lot of this is within their control and within their power. Even the need to procure quickly is well within that executive power. When we went into the risk mitigation IPP program, that was an emergency program and should have been treated as such. But unfortunately, you have legal rankings, you have opposition parties, you've got lobby groups, you've got a lot of interested vested parties that do delay processes. And I suspect the state of disaster is to say that we can no longer afford to be caught up in unnecessary processes. And we do need to procure in the shortest amount of time. The president indicated that some of these projects that they're talking about will be available in as short as 6 months. So we're talking already in July that there'll be some kind of relief on the grid ultimately.
Speaking of unnecessary debates and wranglings, you would have heard the announcement of the new Ministry of Electricity that will be in the presidency. That on its own, if we remember, Lungile, we've spoken so many times, we come from an era where we witness a lot of back and forth between two portfolios and finger pointing when we speak of Minister Mantashe and Minister Pravin Gordhan's portfolios. Adding a third one, where we have the electricity ministry. Yes, we understand what the intention is, but just on that aspect of back and forth or wranglings, do you not think a third portfolio to deal with this crisis would lead to greater back and forth, where there'd be finger pointing again about who's responsible for this aspect of energy in the country and they haven't pulled their weight?
Mfundo, to be very honest with you, I actually don't understand what the intent of that Ministry of Electricity is. So you currently have Eskom that has to report to DPE, who's the shareholder. You've got DMRE, which then looks at the policy, and you've got the regulator, NERSA. Now you're adding on an additional layer. And ultimately, I actually find this is because the president is unable to take a decision on what has to happen. So these are political party matters coming into the energy field now that need to be dealt with in a very strange way. So now you have this electricity ministry who will be in charge of load shedding. This now looks at your EAF, it looks at your reserve margin, it looks at new capacity. This lies under the shareholder compact with DPE. So you're taking this out. You also have the Electricity Regulation Act, which lies within DMRE. So in essence, you'd be taking this out as well, and you'd be carving electricity out of energy, right? So now I have to ask that in terms of Section 34, the determination of the minister of what can be procured for electricity or energy in this country, this will now have to move to the new Ministry of Electricity. That already adds another complexity. Energy planning will now have to, or electricity planning rather, will now have to be done under this new ministry. And let's not forget, now that we're in a state of disaster, you now have the added complexity of having the Minister of Cogta as the overarching, overruling minister in charge of all the others. So now Eskom has basically 5 entities that it's going to have to report to in order to get through the next couple of years.
You actually summed it up when you said politics. You reminded me of a number of experts that have really said at the heart of what we're seeing at Eskom is politics at play. And I even remember the former board member, Busio Mavuso, coming before Parliament and saying this is pure politics. So clearly what I'm hearing or getting from you is that there were political considerations in arriving at this decision to now have a new portfolio.
Absolutely. This is not grounded in any technical sort of competence or business sense or anything that's going to help us get electricity quicker. This is about not being able to handle the turf war between DPE and DMRE. And now it's spreading into a new ministry now. That same ministry is most probably going to have to acclimatize itself with the goings on of at Eskom, which is probably like another 18, 24 months. You have to move stuff over. There's the energy planning, which might have to change, all over again, and take into consideration what this new ministry might require, what the PCC, what NPC might be saying in the president's ear. So you have all these conflating issues, and South Africans are in the dark, and Eskom is not allowed to continue with the business of providing electricity. Instead, it is being used as political football, much to our detriment.